And Jesus said, "No man comes to the Father but by me, because he is the way, the truth, and the life." Sit tight. We're going to discuss this one and a lot more. We'll be right back. Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Rabbi Tovia Singer's Let's Get Biblical Q&A, going for Volume 3 and 4 soon in a theater near you. Welcome back, Rabbi. It's good to see you again, as always.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have me.
Of course it is. Your mother must be very proud.
She has no clue. You know what's
Oh, my.
Yeah, no, I mean, my family, they love me, but they don't, unless something interesting comes out, they don't watch my shows.
Gotcha. That's kind of how it is even with my wife here at the house. I tell them about all the shows, but she says she gets nervous when she watches me on
but
screen.
for you, it's understandable. The question is for me. For you, I understand.
Exactly. Hey, I understand.
For me, it's a big mystery.
That's funny. Okay.
All right.
Oh, my God. You are certainly a wild man, that is for sure. So how's your week been, by the way?
All right. Very productive. Very exciting. Very exciting stuff happening here. We've been putting out new videos. Did another program here in Jakarta. A lot of amazing emails come in. Those of you who have questions on a particular topic, I strongly encourage you to go to YouTube and just put my name in, and whatever the verse you're looking for, the top you're looking for, just search it, and you generally find the answer. Anyway, it's been just a tremendous week. Very, very exciting.
That's really cool. And yeah, and that kind of rule of logic goes with pretty much every channel you go to, even with Tanakh Talk. If you're looking at whether Rabbi Singer and I have done a show on a certain topic, just go to Tanakh Talk in YouTube and search within the YouTube channel of Tanakh Talk, or just search in the main bar and put, John 14:6 or, and then include Tanakh Talk in the title, and it'll pull up anything we've got as a discussion. So it's really, really a handy tool. So anyway, so there goes that. So we're going to take this question, and hold on just a second. I've got to actually pull this back up. Hang on a second. So this week's been quite interesting too. I'm actually playing around with this new microphone here, and apparently I need to. We've got a Tanakh Talk caller actually calling my phone. Sorry guys, we need to keep the phone calls limited to. I'm going to turn my volume off here too, because I don't want to be distracted by my phone. We need to keep the callers actually coming to the studio. So Sandy, if you see this right now live, feel free to call in 855-952-4253. Let me see if I can. Oh, there it goes right there. Okay, so we're going to take this this question right here. So that.
Hi, Rabbi Singer. I have a question for you. I've been watching your program, and I haven't heard this one question asked from the New Testament, where it says in John 14:6 that Jesus said to his disciples, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me." And so I'd like you to explain that from your viewpoint, if you would, please.
I saw a meme one time that actually showed, it was a little cartoon. It showed like Moses over here and showed Jesus standing in front of him, and all these people wanting to get to Mount Sinai, and he's like, "Nope, you got to go through me first." And it was cute, but in Christianity, it's a real serious deal. So if you don't mind, take this away.
Yeah, sure. One of the things that surprise folks who study the Christian Bible, they've studied it all their lives, is that roughly 90% of what we encounter in the book of John is found nowhere in the Synoptic Gospels. And in each and every case, John is presenting us with not just a higher Christology, which means that Jesus is portrayed as divine or much more divine than in the book of Mark, which is largely an adoptionist gospel. Mark is almost certainly written earliest, and when we view Mark, we encounter a gospel where the author has no idea that there's anything unusual about Jesus's conception or birth. In fact, we can be sure of this because as far as Mark is concerned, his own family has no clue that Jesus is something special. On the contrary, in Mark chapter 3, where Jesus is sitting around and with his disciples performing miracles, his family, his mother, they want to drag him away because they think he's essentially out of his mind. The Revised Standard Version and some other translations try to toy with the language because it seems inconceivable, but I want to start with Mark, written about the time of the destruction of the second temple, meaning written about 65, let's say 70. So in Mark, nobody understands who he is, which fits perfectly with Mark. I'm not going to go into Mark very far here, but what's very important in Mark is that nobody knows who Jesus is. No one recognizes who Jesus is. Even his family thinks he's crazy rather than thinks that he is the Messiah. This should come as an enormous surprise to readers because the mother, according to Luke, had a whole conversation with the angel Gabriel in the Annunciation in Luke's infancy narrative. Joseph would have had a whole conversation with the angel as far as Matthew's infancy narrative is concerned. If anybody knew that Jesus was special, it would have been his own family. But Mark has no idea about a virgin birth or any of these ideas. So not only don't we find the virgin birth narrative of Mark, we find a plot device inserted into Mark to convey that, in fact, no one knows who Jesus is and everybody misunderstands him. And in fact, half the book of Mark literally is nobody knows who Jesus is. And if someone figures out who Jesus is, Jesus tells them, quiet, don't tell anybody. Eventually, people figure it out, but this comes later. The key of Mark is that Jesus becomes the Son of God at his baptism, where he's told, you are my son, in the second person, in contrast to Matthew as an example, this is my son. And in Mark, it's the Roman centurion at the cross who gets it, that you are the Son of God. I mean, the Goyim finally get it. That's an adoptionist theology. That's, relatively speaking, to what survived, that's very primitive. John is later. John is 30 years later, nearly 30 years later. Matthew and Luke are, let's say, 10 to 15 years later than Mark, and John is written somewhere 90, 95, so it's, let's say, 10, 15 years after Matthew and Luke. And there is, first of all, an improvement. Jesus is now elevated to some form of deity. Now, when I say that, it does not mean that whoever wrote the book of John believed in the Trinity or the homoousia that emerges out of the Council of Nicaea. That's far, far more improved than anything any author of the Christian Bible had ever conceived, but it's a much higher Christology. Jesus walking around saying, I am, I am, I am. In fact, we find these 7 I ams in the book of John that are very striking. That itself is completely unique to John. I mean, if Jesus was walking around saying these things, did Mark just think that wasn't important enough to report? The answer is that it just wasn't a part of a Christian thinking when Mark was written, but it is later. So at first glance, when we find I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one can come to the Father but by me, we see that at first glance, we see that as, oh, wow, this is a Christianity that has full-blown elevated the Messiah to a divine being. And as it turns out, something I didn't know 30, 5 years ago, but Christians just automatically think Messiah, of course, divine. That's like, of course the Messiah is divine. As it turns out, none of this maps onto anything in Tanakh. If it did, if there was something that said that the Messiah is the way, the truth, and the life, well, everybody would be in church right now. They aren't, because there's nothing remotely resembling this. So on the surface, we just see a trajectory. Jesus is adopted as God's son at the baptism in Mark. We then see a later theology developing where Jesus becomes the Son of God at his conception in Luke, certainly, and Matthew. And then finally, John, he was there from. So this translates into what we discover in John, and that is Jesus is speaking about himself constantly in the book of John. In John 14 itself finds itself inside what's called the farewell discourse. This is by far there's nothing close to it, which essentially takes up all of John 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. All of that is a dialogue that Jesus is having. It's his last farewell discourse, means it's his last, his goodbye, and it's a lot of things, but it's a discourse. It's the longest narrative by far in the Christian Bible. So at first glance, we say, well, Christianity just was headed in a certain direction. And then by the time we get to John, written 90-95, we're seeing a lot of idolatry, and the Messiah now is elevated very high, which is true. But there's something else that's happening here. And that is the dualism of the eschatology. Eschatology is a Greek word from the word eschaton, means the end of times. And this needs to be explained as well. As far as Mark is concerned, Jesus's transformation of the world, what is going to happen as a result of Jesus coming, is linear and it is horizontal, meaning that the change that's going to occur as a result of Jesus's ministry is one that's going to happen during the lifetime of those who are observing it. See Mark chapter 9, verse 1. See Mark chapter 13, verse 30. Where there are many of you here who will not taste of death until these things unfold. Now, certainly, when the book of Mark is written, there were probably people alive at the time who were Christians during the first 30 years of the first century. It's very unlikely there were very many people by 95 who were alive. In the ancient world, people didn't live very, very long. In fact, that's why in Christian thought tradition, the author of the book of John, who is one of the disciples, John the son of Zebedee, it's inconceivable that's the same person. But we'll set that aside. John lived to be 95 or 100 years old. They want him to live that long because they knew it's so late. So the key is, in 70, you could say that this generation will not pass until you will see the glory, the full power of the kingdom of heaven. In fact, in Mark, when Jesus is standing before Caiaphas, the high priest, and he's being accused of very serious charges, that are you claiming to be the Messiah, the Son of the living God? In Mark chapter 14, a little bit later on, and in verse 62 and 63, in 61, 62, 63. And then Jesus says to him, he said, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One coming on the clouds of heaven, which is no doubt a reference to the coming of the Messiah and a connection to Daniel chapter 7, verse 13 and 14. Let's just break that all down. What Jesus is saying to the high priest, who is definitely not a Christian, is you are going to see these things happen. And we find the same thing in Luke chapter 21, verse 32. You're gonna see this happen. It's gonna happen this generation. So, but by the time we get to 9095, guess what? No one is alive. When I say no one, almost no one is alive who was an adult in the year 30. Almost no one is. Just as in the year 1995, how many people were alive who were an adult in the year 1930? There were, but in the in the 20th century is not the best example because of like discoveries like antibiotics. Go back to the 19th century, and it becomes very much less likely that you'll find people alive. The point is that by the time John is written, nobody's alive, or very few people would have been alive, and therefore the target has to be moved. You can't have your presentation of God's kingdom cannot be one on earth where the world is changed and transformed, but rather the promise has to change. It can't be that you're never going to find that in the book of John, that there are many of you standing here who will not taste of death. Never, nothing really resembling that. Why? Because it didn't happen. So therefore, the goalposts have to be shifted. And the goalpost in the book of John is that, in fact, the horizontal, meaning now, things are tough, I'm going to die, but you're going to see the Son of Man coming in full power and glory in the clouds of heaven, and you will not taste of death. That can work in the book of Mark. That can't work in the year 95. That can work in 70 and 65. That can never work in 90. So therefore, the whole target is shifted. The goals have to be shifted to that the kingdom that is coming is one, a heavenly kingdom. And in fact, we find this out very quickly in John chapter 3, in Jesus's conversation with the Orthodox Jew, the Nicodemus, a conversation which could not have occurred, and I'm not going into why, but linguistically it couldn't occur. But let's just work with it, because we're interested not in history right now, but what is happening. So Jesus is conveying to Nicodemus that you need to be born from above. That's the key. There's a double entendre in that in Greek, to be born from above or to be born again is the same word. That's why the conversation couldn't happen, is because they would have been speaking Aramaic, not Greek. In Aramaic, there would be two different words. Let's not go off the rails here. The key is that what Jesus is promising Nicodemus is that the kingdom that's coming is not of this world at all. This final kingdom is from above. And it's a heavenly kingdom. And the only path to it is not remaining here like Caiaphas and then finally seeing, oh boy, what's happening, because all those people died. Everyone died, whether they were Christians or were not Christians, everybody's gone. So the promise then is something that's totally changed, and that is, it's not in this world. It's going to be something heavenly. Now, once it's heavenly, so then it's restricted only to those who are followers of Jesus. If you're not a follower of Jesus, you're not going to heaven. If you're not a follower of Jesus, you cannot get to the Father. No one can come to the Father but by me. Now, a point must be made is that still in this late point of the first century, we still do not have the full-blown Jesus is equal to God. And in fact, we find in John 5, in John 17, here in John 14, the Father is greater than I am. And you will ask the question, well, I thought you said Jesus is God in John. He is a divine being in a Greek sense. Once I say that to you, you might want to ask the question, in what sense was he divine to the author of the book of John? In what sense was he divine to the author of Paul's letters? it's different than the way we would speak about someone who's divine, because in our world, you either are God, divine, or you're totally mortal. In the Greek world, that was not the case. You can very much be both. So they are simply using a different dictionary. So John 14:6 reflects a transformation of the Christian heaven and eternity and eschatology, rather than being one that is an earthly kingdom of God that's going to come to earth and, of course, overthrow everything that's here, which is what we find in Tanakh, that the Messianic age very much is a transformation of this world, where predators and prey will lie together, and there'll be a world peace, and all nations will look to the Mashiach as their leader, whether we look at Zechariah 9:10, whether we look at Daniel chapter 7, verse 13 and 14, very much so. But the goalposts are changed. See John 14 as this is a whole new ballgame. The whole new ballgame is it isn't happening here, it's happening in heaven. And if it's happening in heaven, Jesus then is the only conduit to get to the Father. And in Jesus, the concept of the Messiah is so radically different than anything in Tanakh, much more so than in Mark, because here we find that John 17:3, this is eternal life, they may know thee, Jesus speaking here, and thee is God, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. And we find that idea that Jesus is sent by God, so he's a lesser deity, a son of God, but not the Father. And that's what we find in John. So just simply, John is a higher Christology in a Greek sense, and John has changed the goalposts entirely, and that's why all these texts that we find in the Synoptic Gospels everywhere are nowhere to be found in John, and these I am texts, whether it's John 8 and so on, all that has changed completely, and in fact did not even exist in the Synoptic Gospels, that of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So thank you very much for that question, and I'm glad we were able to discuss this here on air. Shalom.
Very good, very good. Okay, we'll move on to this next caller. Caller, please tell us your name and where you're calling from.
Oh, you talking to me?
You are live on the air. How are you?
Oh, wow. Yeah, my name is Pinchas Levin. Rabbi Singer knows me.
Welcome, Pinchas.
It's a great opportunity for me.
Shalom.
Shalom. First of all, before my question, I most important of attributes is appreciation. I want to thank you publicly, William, for all you're doing, and Rabbi Singer, as I've already mentioned to you, but now I can say publicly, thank you for changing my life past few years, and on a personal note, for how you've endorsed my teachings recently. I'm very thankful to both of you.
Thank you, brother.
My question is interesting. I started reading the New Testament recently, and I had many questions. But here's one in Matthew, which there's nobody in the world I could ask other than Rabbi Singer. So here's my question. In the book of Matthew, in chapter 1, so we have this big controversial verse everyone's screaming about with the virgin. That was the first verse I ever saw in the New Testament. The missionary showed me about this virgin birth. But as I'm reading it, I see in verse 20, we see that this prophecy quoted from Yeshaya, apparently, it actually, it's not like Mr. Matthew says it. It said in verse 20, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream. This is all a dream. So my question to you, Rabbi Singer, is why does anyone make such a big deal about this quote, or better said, misquote, or to use much stronger language about this quote from Isaiah? It's a dream. There's a lot of untruth in the dream. And let me just prove my point, because in Matthew chapter 2, there's another dream. where Joseph is told to go to Jerusalem, and he goes to Jerusalem. This is in verse 19. The Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph, and he said to go to the land of Israel. And Joseph listening went to Israel, but then he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judah, so he left. He went to Nazareth, which it sounds peculiar. I mean, God tells you to go somewhere. You don't just pick up and leave.
That's interesting.
And my answer is that Joseph knows that a dream, there's things that aren't true in a dream. So it isn't true. God, he thought it wasn't clear. A dream isn't clear, and it's not true that he should go to Israel as he sees he can't. And it just simply isn't true that there was a prophecy of a virgin birth. It was a dream. It wasn't a prophecy. That's my question.
That's really cool because I mean, in the Torah it talks about how God spoke with Moses face to face, but with other people, other whatever, they came to them in visions and dreams, right? And so, and like you said, everybody knows that there's dreams are, they're not 100% for whatever reason. So, Rabbi, take this thing away, and thank you for your call, Pinchas. Welcome and shalom.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right,
thank you very much.
Cool.
Pinchas, Rabbi, is really a bright young man, and I was very excited to see his teachings on YouTube, and thank you for that question. So the question essentially is that in Matthew's infancy narrative, in contrast to the only other infancy narrative found in the Christian Bible, that of Luke, it is Joseph that is getting all the information. The angel is informing Joseph in Matthew, whether it's Matthew 1 or Matthew 2, Joseph is the one who's getting it. It's very patriarchal. Luke is going to, in a very stark way, elevate Mary. In fact, we have Mary is portrayed in Luke in the most exalted fashion that we find anywhere in the Christian Bible. There's nothing in that remotely resembles it. In Joseph, in Matthew, it is true that it is Joseph that's receiving this revelation. In the book of Luke, the angel Gabriel, we have the Annunciation. Mary is completely lucid. She's not dreaming anything. It's because Joseph, although Joseph is going through, although Matthew is traveling, is having Joseph be the conduit of information, and I believe this is true for many reasons, but very importantly, Matthew is very aware of how important the tribal genealogy is conveyed from father to son. And in fact, that's how he opens. He opens, this is the genealogy of Jesus Christ. I mean, and so Luke also has a genealogy, but it's in chapter 3. With Matthew, that's right from the get-go, so it's patriarchal. Joseph is not elevated in the book of Matthew as high, nearly as high, as Mary is in the book of Luke. It's incomparable. So therefore, the fact that Joseph would have a dream in Matthew, whereas Mary would be having, just speaking directly to the angel, is certainly understandable. Joseph doesn't play that a very significant role in the Gospels, in the Christian Bible, and even non-canonical texts like, for existence, the Gospel of James, which Joseph plays a very big role. That book never made it into the Christian Bible, but Joseph is a little bit more prominent there as well. The fact that dreams are used as a conduit, where Joseph is assured by the angel in a dream that what is within Mary is of the Holy Ghost, and she's going to bear a son. And then, of course, the famed misquote of Isaiah chapter 7:14, it's understandable why we would find that in Matthew. But one thing, know this, and that is, do not impose Talmudic teachings into the Christian Bible. By the time Matthew was written, let's say 80, 85, the Christian Bible has long departed Jerusalem and is long in Greece, in Greek in every way. It's not just the language, but in the thinking in every way. They're not thinking to themselves, well, you can't always trust a dream. Moreover, the writers of the Christian Bible using dreams would be understandable in that Daniel is important, and Daniel is seeing visions. You have in the book of Genesis, Pharaoh having a dream, which ultimately is very important to Joseph getting out of prison and becoming second in command. Nebuchadnezzar has a. So as far as the writers of the Christian Bible are concerned, these dreams are complete prophecy. They're not thinking that you can't trust every dream or every concept of a dream. Chazal tell us, and this is off the rails a little bit. I should stop there. People go, well, how important our dreams are. Well, if you have a very frightening dream, the important thing is don't take it to heart too much, because taking it to heart is what can injure you. But the key, I want to just move away from that because I have this tendency, I noticed, to go off the rails. As far as Matthew is concerned and its readers are concerned, these dreams are from God through an angel. That's it. And they are real. And whether Joseph is being informed that Mary was not an adulterous woman and should not be put away, do not put away Mary, your wife, or later on when the whole family is in Egypt because they had to escape the wrath of Herod, and now it's time to go home. And as far as Matthew is concerned, the family is not from Nazareth. As far as Matthew is concerned, that whole family, their home is Bethlehem. Going back home from Egypt does not entail going to the Upper Galilee, going to Nazareth. Luke and Matthew are totally opposite on this. As far as Matthew is concerned, Jesus was not born in a manger, in a barn, because of a census that they let. There's no Nazareth here. Each one are using completely different plot devices. But what does occur in Luke in Matthew's story is that because the family was originally from Bethlehem, there's no Nazareth in Matthew before this point. So naturally, when Herod the Great dies in 4 BCE, that means it's safe to come home. In fact, they'd been told already in Matthew chapter 2, verse 13 through 15, that you need to stay in Egypt until Herod is out of the way. And then a completely ridiculous fulfillment citation is employed in verse 15, where the text in Hosea 11 is referring to the children of Israel, not referring to Jesus at all. It's ripped out of context, this is Matthew's field. Whoever wrote the book of Matthew. So the angel, then Joseph discovered, you can't go back home. If you think Herod was bad, he has a son who is now in charge of Judea, Herod Archelaus, who is, as you think his dad was crazy, this guy's a complete nut job. As it turns out, this is historical, meaning just like Hamlet or A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, and all these works of fiction that I'm familiar with are using real historical figures and things we know about them as plot devices in these fictions. The Christian Bible is as well. There is very much a Herod Archelaus. Now, that doesn't work with Luke at all, because Jesus is born after this whole thing. Luke is born when the governor of Syria is given control over Judea because Archelaus is fired. Archelaus was such a nut job that the Romans removed him in 6 CE because he was too crazy for the Romans. That's quite a threshold. I mean, you have to be very, 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 very crazy to be too crazy for the Romans, but he was. So therefore, what happens in Matthew is, can go back to Bethlehem because Bethlehem, look at the map, is below Yerushalayim, meaning it's in the heart of Yehuda. I only drove it 500 times, but by car from Yerushalayim to Bethlehem is whatever, 20-minute drive, unless you had a major traffic jam. It's just really close. It's in Judea. Everything in Israel is close because it's a very, very small country, very small place, 25,000 square kilometers, very, very tiny. So therefore, as far as the Christian Bible is concerned, these dreams that are being conveyed are pure prophecy. It's true that Luke's in Luke's infancy narrative, Mary is getting direct dialing to an angel, but she's getting it directly, and Joseph is not, because Joseph just is not that important to any of the gospel writers. He's there, he's a device. He's clueless. He does what the angel tells him to, but he's not the major figure in the Christian Bible. So don't impose Jewish law and Jewish thinking about dreams, the nature of dreams, the veracity of dreams onto the Christian Bible. These dreams are everywhere, and it's not hard for the Christian Bible have to use dreams, because we do find we find in Tanakh that people do have dreams, and they are very meaningful. Whether it was, as I mentioned, Nebuchadnezzar early on in the book of Daniel, or in Genesis with Joseph and Pharaoh and so on. The key is that what is, I think, much more striking is that these two Gospels, Matthew and Luke, are using totally different, contradictory, unreconcilable plot devices in order to get Jesus to be born in Bethlehem, but to ultimately known as Jesus of Nazareth. He is never referred to as Jesus of Bethlehem, because I think he was from Nazareth, and the Bethlehem thing had to be inserted, and each of these authors had to develop a different device to get that to happen. As it turns out, these two devices are not only, they're completely incompatible and completely inconsistent with each other. Anyways, Rabbi, thank you so much for calling. I encourage the listeners to watch his stuff on YouTube, his Torah teaching. He's a very, very bright young man. And thank you very much for joining us.
That'd be Rabbi Pinchas Levine. You can find him on Facebook as well. I didn't realize we were friends there, so it's nice talking with him. Okay, so we'll move on to this next caller. Caller, please tell us your name and where you're calling from.
This is Sandy from Texas.
Hey, Sandy, welcome back. How are you?
I'm good. Well, I have so many questions, but I guess I better pick one.
Yep, pick your hottest one. There you go.
Okay. The scriptures, the Tanakh, or specifically, I guess, the Torah, the whole thing, everything. It was strictly for the children of Israel and them alone. Am I correct?
Talking about the entire Tanakh was strictly for Bnei Israel.
Yeah, just at that time, that was for them and nobody else.
Not correct at all. We find that we have people that, like Job, who lived long before the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, who is the focus of this entire book, which is likely the oldest book in Tanakh. And Job is a ben Noach. He's keeping all the Noachide laws. Notice that Job is righteous in some ways, but he's never cited for being righteous because he kept Shabbos, because the nations of the world are not mitzvah, they're not commanded to keep Shabbos. See Exodus chapter 31. It's Beini Uvein B'nai Yisrael. There are some commandments that are only binding on Klal Yisrael. I know this comes as a surprise to people, but although Abraham is the father of the Bnei Israel, he himself technically was not Jewish. He was a Mesopotamian. So the role of the Jew really is to facilitate the repentance of the world. The key role of the Jew in Tanakh is to be a light to the nations. This comes very early on. Now, if we are a mamleches kohanim v'goy kadosh, before the 10 Commandments are given in Exodus 20, I implore you to read Exodus 19. HaKadosh Baruch Hu designates Klal Yisrael, the Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, as having a unique role in the world, essentially as the rabbis of the world. You are a unique nation to me, a mamleches kohanim, a kingdom of priests, v'goy kadosh, and a holy nation. And then we find a phrase only used twice in the Torah, ki li kol haaretz. Again, ki li kol haaretz. There are only 2 times we find that phrase in the Torah. Here in Exodus 19, and with regard to the laws of Shemitah, where the land has to be left alone on the 7th year, and we find there again, the world belongs to me, the earth belongs to me. Now, if the Jewish people, and I don't mean Jews who are not religious, I don't mean Bernie Madoff, I don't mean Noam Chomsky, I don't mean Sam Harris, and I don't mean Bobby Fischer. Of course, the Jews could opt out of the message and be gone. In the days of Elijah, only 7,000 Jews were loyal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The rest of them were worshiping Baal. Only 7,000 didn't kiss his hand. So, what we find is that the role of the Jew really is to be the firstborn son. What does that mean? It's widely misunderstood by the nations of the world. Say, the Jews, we're a privileged group. I can't join Judaism because it's only for the Jews. Silly people. The Jews are there to facilitate that the younger children would be raised up. Now, it doesn't mean firstborn son that the Jews are the oldest nation. We're by far not the oldest nation, but just as the firstborn son, the oldest, is there and acts eventually as a proxy of the parents to teach the younger children how to talk to their dad. And in some way, in some families, you have a large family, the oldest child, the parents can go away. The oldest child is there. There's special responsibilities to the younger children. And that's why the oldest child receives double inheritance, because in a sense, he had a completely different mandate, and that is to, in some way, to represent the parents. Well, as it turns out, we find that in Isaiah chapter 42, verse 6, with the children of Israel called a covenant nation. If you have any question about what that means, in the same passage, a light to the nation, or lagoyim, a light to the nation. So one may say that the Jews are here to facilitate the repentance of the world. The same thing we find in Isaiah chapter 49, verse 6. We know that who the servant is. We've been told that repeatedly as early as 3 passages earlier, Isaiah 49, verse 3, and we're told that the servant, Israel, has 2 audiences, and they must bring about the restoration of the tribes of Jacob, meaning those the members of the children of Israel who are loyal to Hashem. Have to remember there are many Jews who don't know about the Torah. We have to reach out to the rest of the tribes of Jacob. Moreover, they must be in Or Goyim. So as it turns out, there are special mitzvos that are mitzvah that are commanded on the Jews, because the Jews are operating, if they're following HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they're operating in a different way. And just like a car and a plane use similar fuel, I mean, similar, combustible, so on. But if you tried putting in an airplane the kind of fuel that you put inside your car, it won't work. A Jew can't eat. It just he's flying on it. Now a Jew can opt out of it. A Jew say, I don't want anything to do with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I want to follow Jesus. I want to follow Krishna. I want to follow other things. So then they're lost. They have no covenant. See Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 9, and again verse 12. The covenant only is to those Jews who accept the Ol Malchus Shemayim, the yoke of heaven upon them. So the point here is that the role of the Jew is to be a light to the world. Most Jews, it might be argued, opted out of that mandate, and there's no reason for them to be here any longer. They're gone. The reason why the Jews are an eternal nation is because they have an eternal message. It's people see that as, they're an eternal nation because the Jews are so privileged. Just no. In fact, it's clear that the Jews endure much more suffering than the non-Jews, because conversely, if a Jew has such an inability and dispenses with it and jettisons his mandate, he's not responsible just for his own spiritual failure, but he then is responsible for the spiritual failure of the nations of the world, because he then does not carry out the mandate which HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be his name, gave him, and they disappeared. Where are all the Jews who became Christians in the first century? Where are the grandchildren of Peter? They're not with us today. They're gone. They disappeared. They have no covenant. Why? Because they followed a false religion, and therefore they can't be a part of it. Only those who are preserved are those who rejected all the claims of the Christian religion and all the other mystery religions, and didn't become Hellenized and remain loyal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And those are the only ones who HaKadosh Baruch Hu protected and maintained their Jewish identity. All the Jews who became Christians in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century, there were plenty. Their children are no longer with us today. All the Jews you'll meet today, not all are religious, but they'll all tell you my great-great-grandfather was not only religious, he was the chief rabbi of some country. Those are the only ones who make it. So do understand that the Jews are used, the B'nai Yisrael more specifically. I'm just using Jews and the children of Israel interchangeably because that's just conventional language. The children of Israel here really to facilitate the salvation of the non-Jews. That's what we're here for. In a way, we're here to make sure that those who are not Jewish know how to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Again, those who are loyal to Hashem. So the answer to your question is that the Jews are given unique mitzvahs. Absolutely. A nation that has such a responsibility, has such a mandate, had to go through the Kur HaBarzel, the slavery in Egypt for hundreds of years. Why? Why do we thank Hashem so much for bringing us through Egypt and freeing us from slavery? We should say, well, you got us here in the first place. You told Abraham in Genesis 15 we're going here. You got us in trouble. You get us out. No, we had to go through the civilized Mitzrayim. We had to go through these difficulties so we'd have the potential to be sensitive to the ger, sensitive to the stranger, because ger ma'yisem be'eretz Mitzrayim, you yourself were slaves and foreigners or strangers in the land of Egypt. So thank you very much for your question.
Okay, very good. That was an interesting answer, too. Caught me off guard a little bit as well. All right, so we'll take this next caller. Caller, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from. Callers, when you call in, make sure that you keep your phone close to your ear. There's about a 20 to 30-second delay from what we say to the time you hear it or see it on your monitor. So, caller, are you there? Can you hear us? You are live on the air. All right, apparently somebody walked away from the phone because the delay is not that far. So we'll take this next caller. All right, caller, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Yes, I am Brock from Missouri. How's it going?
Doing well. Hello, Brock. Welcome to the show.
Shalom.
Yes, I don't have any questions for myself, but if it's okay, I've seen some questions in chat that I think would be easy if I could ask for some people, if that's okay with you guys.
Just pick one of the questions if you don't mind. That'd be great.
All right, I'll just pick the first one that I saw. Don't many think Jesus was created by God from the very beginning? I have had scripture from Genesis. It quotes at me to prove Jesus was there with God. So God created Jesus, then created the earth then. That was the question.
Okay, very good. We'll take this off. Thank you. Just tune in for your answer.
Okay.
All right,
Okay.
Okay.
We covered that question a few weeks ago.
Right.
I'll just point out one angle that I didn't mention at the time. The book of John famously begins with a prologue that extends for 18 passages. These passages are widely understood to convey that from John's perspective, this prologue is completely unique to John. In fact, it's completely unique to the first chapter, because the term logos, all this is nowhere found in the rest of the book of John, going from chapter 2 all the way through 21. But now, many people read this and say, well, John thought Jesus was fully God, means equal to the Father. In the beginning was the Word. This is so famous to anyone who went to yeshiva. I'm kidding. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Verse 2, and he was God, he was with God in the beginning. And verse 3 is the key rub. Through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. That's the key point. Now, I want to address the prologue, without question, are the most widely discussed passages in all the Christian Bible, and scholars of the New Testament disagree over these passages more frequently than any other passage in the Christian Bible that I can think of. What is being conveyed? I might convey the following, and that is, as I have mentioned, this is one of 100 points. As I have mentioned, as far as the book of John is concerned, Jesus is a divine being, but not in our sense divine, meaning God created the universe. A point that has to be made in Tanakh, you have God and then everything else, and none of those other things are God. They might be called God, which can make it tricky because they are reflecting God's will or speaking in the name of God, as Isaiah is called God in chapter 7, verse 10. Moses called God in Exodus chapter 7, verse 1. But they're not God in any conventional sense. But to the Greeks, there's a whole strata of gods. There is the great god Zeus, and there are a whole series of gods, the Olympian gods, from Mars to Venus, all these gods of war and love and wine, and they go all the way down to the lower strata of gods who are both divine and human, and that's where Jesus falls into. I write about this extensively in volume 1 of Let's Get Biblical. What I would convey to you is that, strangely, if you look at almost any Christian commentary on John chapter 1, in the beginning was the Word, they all then say, this harkens back to Genesis chapter 1, which begins as Bereshis bara Elokim, in the beginning, God created. Everyone notices that. Everyone knows that the author of the book of John wanted his incipit of his prologue to match Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. What most people don't notice that I've observed is that this tells us a lot about what John thought about Jesus' divinity, that he was not God because it was in the beginning. At some point in the eternal past, Jesus becomes God, and then that God becomes incarnate, means gains a body. That's why it's called incarnation theology. So John's prologue, and that John conveys that the world was essentially not only created with Jesus, but by Jesus and through Jesus, is telling us that Jesus belongs to that category of divine beings who were part of the creation, who themselves were in the creation. And therefore, matching it to Genesis 1 means that John did not think that Jesus was equal to the God the Father, as we see in John 5, verse 19, 20. I'm only doing the one who sent me. And if you see me to see the Father, but we're not the same. We are one in our agency and our purpose of the same accord. John chapter 10, verse 30, 31, 32. Of course, this is widely misunderstood, just as in John's farewell discourse in John 17:11, that Jesus praying to God, asking that the disciples should be one, Greek, simple Greek word, as we, God and the Son, are one. God and Jesus are one. So why don't you just take that as it's counterintuitive, but what it is it gives us a little bit more of an insight into the Joannian community that would produce Joannian theology and would, of course, produce the book of John. Anyways, thank you very much for your question.
All right, very good. That was a good answer. Okay, so we're going to move on to this next caller. Just let you guys know real fast, when you call in, if caller on is on your screen and you try to call in while that's on the screen, you most likely will not get through. So if you want to time your calls, it'll be very good. And also, real quick, just to bring it back up again, I showed it a minute ago, but I'm going to put it up on the screen one more time. OutreachJudaism.org. You can find his 2-volume book set, as well as... you can find the 2-volume book set and other CDs and debates and things that why is that not going up? Hold on. There it is. Okay. Other like debates and lectures, things like that. Really fascinating stuff at the website. CDs are out of print. However, you can download the audio files by going to the website, outreachjudaism.org, and click on the free audio tab at the top. And you'll find that this information, all the information in these audio files is not what's in the books, but they complement what's in the book. So it's really getting a double dose. So anyway, okay, Rabbi, we're going to take this next caller. Caller, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from.
Yes, this is Janos calling from California.
Janos, welcome to the show.
And I just had I just wanted Rabbi to include me in his prayers. Because I need prayer for my family to be reunited with them, because I have a almost 2-year-old daughter that I haven't seen in 4 months that I need to be with. And also I wanted to make a comment on something that I've been watching your guys' show for a really long time now, and it has taught me a lot, and I've been reading the Bible a lot too, and I see that God could never have a son like Jesus, because, God said that there's only him, the one, and there's no other God besides him, and who's to say, if there were a Jesus, like divine like that he'd say someday that, oh God, I want to have a kid too someday, and then there'd be a whole lot of gods, and that would go totally against the Torah.
Can we do this, my dear brother, with your permission? I'm very grateful that you called, and I can hear in your voice that you're hurting a lot. And I would prefer, if possible, because you're going through a very difficult challenge in this stage of your life, to maybe speak with you on Skype or something like that. Is that possible? So we can address that privately, because I really want this aspect of your life to work out really well. But on air, I would never be able to adequately guide you and assist you and certainly pray with you properly. Would you consider speaking to me off here? My email address is toviasinger1@aol.com. My
Yes,
name,
definitely.
the number one at AOL. Let's just have this conversation off here, because it sounds to me like you love Hashem very, very much, and you're going through a very difficult time in your life, and it is difficult. One thing I will say is, this is a problem from what you've described, but it's temporary. Look at it this way. It means sadness and being depressed is not a good idea for you now. You need to be stronger than ever. Pray to Hashem for guidance, but I would like to help you. But this is, we need to talk personally. Please send me an email, and then we can find a time where you and I can talk personally, and we can work this through. Would that be okay with you?
Yes, of course, Rabbi.
All right,
Thank
let's
you
just
very
do
much.
that, sweetheart. This is not the right forum for somebody like yourself who's going through so much trauma at this stage in your life. Let's do that, okay?
All right. Very good, Jonas. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for calling in. Shalom, shalom.
All right.
Okay.
All right, shalom. Be well.
Okay, very good. All right, phone lines are back open. We probably got time for one more call, one more question. I think, actually, I just found a question that we probably need to get with, actually. This is coming from YouTube chat. Andrea Weinberg, thank you for monitoring the chat for me. A question about from Alex Wright above says, please ask Rabbi Tovia about Ezekiel passage where he is speaking to Israel, saying one of their great sins was saying he was a man. Do you understand that?
I would like to know. I'd like to know which passage he is referring to.
Let me see if I can find it here.
So, because there could be a lot of passages that are confused. It's better if people just call in with their questions, but right. I'm not sure what passage he's referring to. We have a caller.
Okay, welcome back to the show. You're live on the air. What is your question for Rabbi? Hello, you are live on the air.
Hello, Rabbi. Can you hear me?
You're good to go. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hello.
Rabbi, can you hear the caller?
Shalom, welcome. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Hello, Rabbi. I've been debating a Christian and over the virgin birth of Jesus, and he specifically mentioned that the prophecy is for a virgin birth, whereas when I pointed out that this is just supposed to be a normal birth and not a virgin birth, they said then what's the point of the prophecy, because if it's just a normal birth, that doesn't really add to anything. It's just, so the prophecy is that it has to be a special kind of a birth in order for it to be a sign for human beings to see. So how do we debate that with a Christian who says that it has to be some special kind of a birth, otherwise how will you figure out whether the Messiah has come or not?
Okay, that's a really great question.
And what was your name, brother? I'm sorry.
My name is Robin.
Robin, thank you for calling in. That's a great question.
Thank you.
We'll get right to it, okay?
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is a very, very good question, and I'm very grateful that you called. I don't know if anyone's ever called in with that question. I do examine this point in an extensive chapter in Volume 1 of Let's Get Biblical, and I must explain this. It's just a great, great question. I want to present the Christian argument here. First, the antecedent point. In Matthew, Joseph is told in a dream that, number one, Mary was not unfaithful to him, and although the two of them never slept together, and she's pregnant, and Joseph wanted to do it, any person who was betrothed and discovered that his bride is pregnant and he had nothing to do with it, he wanted to put her away. He wanted to divorce her. The angel informs Joseph that do not put away Mary, your wife, because that which is within her womb is of the Holy Spirit, and she will give birth to a child. The name is Jesus. He will save his people from the sins. The key point is that this is a miraculous conception. That's the whole point of Matthew and Luke, but we're going to focus on Matthew now. And that is that this is a completely miraculous event because she has conceived without a man. And then Matthew does what Luke doesn't do. We have a lot of, in the Christian Bible, Matthew doing things that Luke doesn't do. Fulfillment citations is one of them. And we are told in Matthew chapter 1, and this is not an arbitrary event, that the Messiah is to be born to a virgin, but actually is foretold. Behold, quoting Isaiah, we are told, behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they will call his name Emmanuel, which means God is with us. Now, Christians are very well aware of the staggering problem that when we look at Isaiah 7:14, we look at the original, we discover that the single most important point is that, as far as the church is concerned, is that this woman is a virgin when she conceives. But when we look at Isaiah 7:14, we don't find that one word. There is no other word like it. There is only one way in both biblical and modern Hebrew to convey certain virginity, and that is betulah. There is no other way to convey that. And as it turns out, that word appears nowhere in Isaiah 7:14. In fact, that word appears nowhere in the entire 7th chapter of Isaiah. That word does appear in the book of Isaiah some 5 times, but not in relation to this, because Isaiah doesn't have a virginity in mind. This is a complete mistranslation. The original Hebrew says something else. It says, Lachein yitain Hashem hu lachem os. Behold, the Lord of his own will give you a os, which means a sign. Hine ho'al mahara, behold, the young woman is with the child, v'yeled his bane, and she will bear a son, v'karas shemo Emmanuel, and she will call his name Emmanuel. And this is where the Christian argument comes in, or the Christian apologetic, the defense comes in. Christians know that this is a big problem. I mean, big is not the word for it. It's a existential, monumental problem, and that is the word for virgin isn't there. Do not believe people who say the word alma means a virgin. It isn't true. In fact, in Proverbs 30, it's talking about an adulterous woman who's very much not a virgin. Alma means a young woman. A young woman might be a virgin, like in the case of Rebecca, just like in the English language. There's not some big mystery. You could, when you refer to a person as a young woman, you're saying 2 things about this individual. She's young and she's a she. She's female. Her sexual history is not conveyed by that. A young woman might be a virgin or might not be a virgin. As it turns out, it is young women that have babies and not old women. So it's the same thing in Hebrew. There's not some woo-woo exegesis going on here. It's the same thing in the English language. Now, what Christians argue is the following. It's a very interesting argument, and it dates back quite a few years. I don't mean 6. And the argument goes like this. Hold on, Jewish people, those who don't accept Christ, hold on for one moment. Don't get so excited. As it turns out, you have a big problem. If you, the Jews, are claiming that Isaiah 7:14 is not talking about, is not describing a virgin who conceives, where's the miracle? What is so odd? How has this become the miracle that's going to be a sign? This sign, if you read it in context, is about a civil war with Syria and the northern kingdom of Israel form an alliance against the southern kingdom. I'm not going to go into it now. Read it in context. Just right now, that event occurs 2,700 years ago, meaning 7 centuries before the Christian era. But here's what Christians argue. They go like this. What if this woman conceives through the normal, natural sexual union of a man and a woman? Where's the big miracle? There's no miracle there. That happens every day, millions of times a day. Women become pregnant all over the world through a sexual union of a man and a woman. There is no miracle. Therefore, by the fact that the text says that I'm going to provide it, this is going to be miraculous, and therefore you're going to know it's going to happen, indicates that this couldn't possibly be a natural conception. It had to be miraculous by how this conception is introduced. Do you all get that? This is a very, very interesting question. Really interesting. Okay, so here, let me explain. They're wrong on 2 massive accounts. The text says, "L'chein yitin Hashem hu lachem os." Behold, the Lord is going to give you a sign. The word sign means something that can be seen. The word sign does not mean a miracle. That means there's someone saying, oh, it's a sign, it must be a miracle. That's not the case at all. One of the first signs we find in the entire Tanakh is the sign of the rainbow, which demonstrates to the world that there will never be a flood again. Well, as it turns out, there is nothing miraculous about a rainbow, but what is striking about a rainbow is the fact that it's visually striking. You can see it. You can see light passing through a material that's far more dense than air. Light slows down when passing through dense material like water particles in the atmosphere. It slows down to about 3/4 of that means it loses 25% of its velocity. And because there are different wavelengths, that means different colors have different wavelengths, therefore when the light refracts through the water particles, all the colors don't pass through at the same time, and then it explodes into different colors. You'd find this phenomena would occur if light passed through glass, another transparent material that slows light down. Okay, I'm not going to go further into the physics. The key is that we find signs all over Tanakh. There's nothing miraculous. Now, a sign can be miraculous. Doesn't mean a sign is miraculous, but a sign is always something you can see. Think about the word sign. The word sign is always something that you could see. As it turns out, it's vinahapich. It's just the opposite. Listen very carefully. So what I want you to do is, whatever else you're doing, just stop for a moment and just listen very carefully. A sign must be something that you could see. That's why it's called a sign. It doesn't mean that it must be miraculous. It's just something that you can identify. It might be miraculous for sure, but it just has to be something you can see. Now, here's the rub. Listen carefully. As it turns out, a virgin birth or virgin conception can't be seen. Think about that for a moment. Behold, the Lord is going to provide you a sign. That means that you can see. It doesn't mean it's miraculous. It just means it's something that's visible. As it turns out, let's say, God wanted, he could have a virgin conceive. That would be, in the scheme of God's creation, that would be a very minor miracle. HaKadosh Baruch Hu creating man from the clay of the earth. That's so a virgin conceiving, certainly, we don't reject it because God couldn't have a virgin conceive. Sarah conceived. That is easily argued from a scientific standpoint. A woman who's run out of eggs becoming pregnant is a far more scientifically a far bigger miracle than a woman who's just experienced parthenogenesis. That's not the point at all. The point is you can see it. So think. I'm going to ask you a question. if a virgin, because God makes a virgin conceive, let's just think about that for a moment. What would you see? What are you seeing? That are you seeing that she never had intercourse? How do you see that? Do you like follow her around and have closed circuit cameras on her? I'm not trying to be cute. I'm trying to make this point. When she gives birth, what is it about her giving birth that everybody could see that she was? How did if a virgin did give birth, what would be seen? What would be observed that she never had sex before? The answer is nothing. A virgin birth, one could argue, is a miracle for sure, but you can't. A virgin birth, by definition, can't be a sign. It fails the words of Isaiah. That means v'nahapachu. It's just the opposite. I hope you catch this. It doesn't say in Isaiah 7:14, behold, the Lord of his own will give you a mophes. A mophes means a miracle, meaning something that is beyond nature occurs. And an os just means a sign. A sign must fulfill one criteria, and that is it has to be something that could be seen. If signs in Chicago are getting blown down by strong winds, burying stop signs and yield signs underground would then serve no purpose because you can't see it, although they would never get knocked down again. A sign is something you can see. Think for a moment. If a woman never had sexual intercourse with anyone and had a baby, what are you seeing? You are seeing nothing. There is nothing observed. Therefore, it fails that test of a sign. However, then you're asking the question, what exactly is a sign? Well, what is the sign are the next verses. As it turns out, the conception of the child is not the sign. I know this comes as a very big surprise. And if it comes as a surprise, with the love in my heart, you didn't read Isaiah 7 from beginning all the way to the end of verse 25, because the sign is not the conception or birth of the child. The two verses that follow Isaiah 7:14 are the sign. The sign, again, what's really happening in Isaiah 7? Please, please, please just read from Isaiah 1 through 13 before you go further. If you don't, this is going to become, I'm just going to trust Rabbi Tovia Singer because he sounds like a smart guy. Stop that. It's enough depending on men. I can point you somewhere, but I please read it for yourself. Please go to the text. Please do that. I'll point you somewhere, but not that check it out. You see, I'm telling you the truth. Please do this, because or else you're going to be just walking in the dark, in darkness, if you're not reading context. And I'm very grateful that some of you just like rabbis. I appreciate that. I really don't want to do that. I want all of you to be scholars of your own account, meaning that you're going to primary sources. Just read the primary sources. Okay, so what the next verses say, that curd, butter, and honey will he eat before he knows to reject bad and choose good. This is talking about the child. The context is that Jerusalem is surrounded by two massive armies who want to remove Ahaz as king. Ahaz did not deserve to be saved, but he had to, because God made a promise to David HaMelech that his children, even the wicked children, would not be removed, punished. They'd be punished personally, but he could not allow Ahaz, a very wicked man, really one of the worst of the worst, he couldn't allow the Davidic kingdom to be cut off. So therefore Hashem is intervening here. When you're under siege, imagine you're in a city, okay? And you're surrounded completely by enemies, very powerful enemies. We're introduced in the beginning of the chapter that the whole house of David, their hearts were shaking like leaves in a tree that are rustling in the wind. I mean, people were petrified. And what happened? So he's saying that this child will be eating honey, butter, and honey. What does that mean? He's eating a pastrami sandwich with a milkshake. When you're under siege and your life is in grave danger, You're not processing fundamental foods. You're not taking, if you can get your hands on milk, you drink it. You don't start making butter out of it. You don't make curds out of it. You don't make chemo out of it. You can get a glass of milk under siege. You're not making butter. They didn't make butter in Stalingrad. If people are starving to, they can get their hands on anything. There was no process beyond it. No cheese, emulsifiers, none of that. Honey, you don't cultivate bees under siege. What? No one does that. So what the text is saying is that this child, who she is pregnant with, is going to be eating butter and honey before, when he knows to reject bad and choose good, meaning he matures. Why? Because before the boy knows enough to reject what is wrong and choose what is good, these two kings will be rejected. So what is the sign, sweethearts? The sign is the maturity of the child. That can be seen. Is there anything miraculous about children maturing? Nothing. But can it be observed? Of course it can. Meaning, the child, before it matures, before it knows everything good and bad, is going to be eating butter and cream and enjoying honey, which means the siege is going to be on, which means your two enemies will be destroyed and will be laid to waste. Read the end of Isaiah chapter 7, verse 16. So the key is the word sign, the fact that it is a sign, just think, means that it can't be a virgin birth. That can't be the point. The point can't be the virgin birth. It can't. Therefore, Isaiah 7:14 can't be talking about a virgin conceiving. What are you seeing? Did you understand that point? If a woman never had sexual intercourse with a man and has a baby, what did you see? What would be different about her? Nothing. You couldn't see anything. You could very much see the end of a siege. You very much could see the maturity of the child. You very much could see this child eating butter, cream, honey. It's over. The war is over, and the house of David has been saved. This is a really great question. I know I took you on another level, and I hope you go, wow, Torah is so interesting. Tanakh is so beautiful. It's so elegant. And just know something else. Torah is Hashem Tamimah. It's perfect. When I was a youngster, of all the disciplines and sciences, I just loved math. I loved math. I really loved math because it has to work. It has to work. Algebraic equations just have to be right. And if it doesn't work, then you did something wrong. That's what Tanakh is. It has to work. It might use theorems that you have to be familiar with that are based on a series of postulates, but wow, math is so brilliant because it just has to work out. It has to. That's what Tanakh is. But if you're not looking at the equations, if you're not looking at the algebraic equations, you're not examining what's on both sides of the equal sign, of course you're going to wind up in La La Land and believe all kinds of silly nonsense. So the key kindlech is study it very, very carefully. HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not come to Jacob in a dark place and say, seek me in vain, he isn't hidden. He's there for all the world to see that he is true. He is Nemon Ato Haresh Ladas. You could be shown this so that you can know. The word is knowledge in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 35. Ki Hashem hu Elokim. No. Knowledge. Study it. Ein oid milvado. There is no one else besides him. Nothing. No one. No Trinity. There's one HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Blessed be his holy name. Let us see the coming of the true Mashiach, b'mheira b'yameinu, very quickly in our time. Thank you for that insightful question.
Amen. Great question. Great answer, as usual. And so for all you people out there, if you're enjoying this, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Turn on the notifications. If you do not turn on the notifications, guess what? It's like getting a YMCA, a card, and never showing up to actually exercise. So
Can I just make one point here?
Yes, absolutely.
It's a play on words. I want with these answering your questions, I want to provoke you to jealousy. Meaning, I want you, Kinderlach, children of the Most High, I want you to be going, slapping yourself in the hand, going, I got to get back to the Hebrew. It's an easy language. So what I want you to do is to not need me. I want to be unemployed for a lack of customers. I really do. All rabbis want to empower their students. We all do. Nothing brings a rabbi more joy than we have a student who one day knows more than we do. That's why we want you to know the Hebrew. We pound it into your head. Hebrew is a small language of less than 9,000 words. It's so easy compared to other languages. Know the Hebrew. We want to empower you. We love the relationship we have with you, but we want you to be strong. We want you to be able to go to the primary sources. We want to enable you to be hearing the voice of Hashem for yourself through HaKodesh Baruch Hu's word. That's what every rabbi wants. We really, really, really are very much looking forward to our students knowing more than us, being wiser than us, that you would not, and you will then be able to move on and become a teacher yourself. So if I say things and you go, wow, that's so interesting, I have an agenda, and my agenda is I want you to be knowledgeable. I want to make you go, oh, why didn't I see that? I really have to study Lashon HaKodesh. I have to study the Holy Tongue so I can have this delicious relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Please keep that in mind of what we're thinking. So, yeah, I want to get you really excited about Hebrew. You've got to go to the text. You rely on commentaries, sometimes translations, but this is temporary. You don't spend your life in a wheelchair once you're healed. Anyways, thank you again for that question.
Awesome. And some people asking where to learn. I've got about probably a dozen or two shows on Tanakh Talk. I think 6 of them are in a category called entry-level biblical Hebrew, where I'm just teaching you some basic stuff that I know. And then I've got Gabriel Sanders, who actually is a Hebrew teacher in general, and he teaches also on Tanakh Talk as well. So that's some free resources for you there to get started off with. And he actually mentions on his shows many resources. So if you're interested in learning Hebrew, I would say that's really a good place to start. So well, thank you all for tuning in, and Rabbi, thank you for tuning in. Without you, we wouldn't have a show. So
it wouldn't be so good. It would be good, but not so terrific.
It would be less than half, that's for sure. So
you're right, but what are you going to do? All right. Anyway,
right on. So anyway,
it was a pleasure having me on.
Yeah, of course it was. So we'll see everybody next week, same time, same place, Hashem willing. Thank you all for tuning in, and be sure to share the videos with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Very, very important. So y'all take care. Shalom, shalom. See ya.
חשוב מכל חשוב